All right, peace and blessings, family. Welcome to another episode of the Prolific Perspectives Podcast. Today I have a special guest filming on location, brother Kareem Young, also known as Yawo or Ya Bile. Brother, man, it's been a long time coming. I appreciate you, brother. Welcome to the podcast.
Filthy.
In terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of business ownership, you also had a successful career as a coach. So, but then you got a revelation that kind of steered you in the direction to going full-blown entrepreneur, full-blown business owner. So can you kind of, just for the sake of letting people know how life kind of unfolds or life happens, you know, can you kind of go into the success that you had and what industry, you know, or what, you know, as a coach, and then kind of how the revelation came to switch paths and switch lanes to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So we would have to give some historical context to bring it back to today.
Okay.
So I worked in corporate America for a Fortune 500 company in IT previous to coaching. And I played college sports, and I always was, I guess, I understood what coaches were teaching us. So I had gotten 3 separate phone calls from previous coaches to go into strength and conditioning and or coaching football. And I said no until the 3rd time because I was making some pretty good money in corporate America. At that time, I had moved to Atlanta, which I still have a property there. But I ended up going into coaching, which I loved coaching because I love being able to touch, the athletes directly, and at the same time having outcomes that you could measure. Right. And that was so important to do. Right. But about 10 years ago, I got my first EFI reading, and I just come into EFI and understanding exactly, I always had a good context of African spirituality, but there was this missing aspect of participating in it. So, you know, it was this intellectual interaction with it, but at the same time, didn't necessarily know or understand how, or even have the outlets to know how you wanted to participate with it.
Gotcha.
So I got my first reading, and I continued to get more readings after that. And by that time, I was prepared to jump out of coaching. But at the same time, I understood that it was necessary for me to finish up what I started for the sake of a lot of the athletes who didn't have father figures, who really were inside of a bubble and had no context of security or any example of maturation.
Gotcha.
So the EFI reading said, you know, your spiritual success and your financial success are wings of the same bird. And what ended up happening was I started realizing that spirituality was speaking directly to my finance. And one of the biggest things that I had to undo from my Western context of understanding things was that no, spirituality has to be over here and finance is over here. No. If I said they have to be together, in order for you to be successful, you had to do them at the same time. And that was a real big shift for me. Because what I realized was how Western my mind was, how limiting I was with understanding what it meant to do 2 things at once that I otherwise assumed were so separate.
Right. Well, we're a product of our environments too. So.
Yes. Yes. And so what ended up happening was I realized that the increase in my spiritual acumen increased my business acumen. And I realized that, and I'm saying only recent, I said 10 years ago, only in the last couple of years have I totally been able to grasp how those 2 things work together. And that's so important for me. And I'm not, and I'll say this, and I'm not necessarily saying that he is a hero of mine by any measures, but when I was going through this reconfiguring of what it meant to mold these two concepts that I otherwise thought were foreign together. I read a quote by J.P. Morgan. If some of you don't know who J.P. Morgan was, he was a banker who really started the Federal Reserve. But one of the things that he said that was so poignant was, and I think it was a conversation that he had with someone, was they had a conversation about astrology. And J.P. Morgan rebutted the comment. You know, they said millionaires don't use astrology. He said, no, millionaires don't use astrology. Billionaires do. And from that point, it really solidified that I wasn't the only one who had to bring together two somewhat foreign, seem to be foreign concepts. But then it started getting me to look back at ancient Kemet and understanding that their priests were very well-rounded. You know, they didn't just do spirituality. In fact, a lot of the priests were the scientists. And so you start realizing that after 40 years, someone would become an actual full-fledged initiate, or someone who was a actually complete individual in Kemet. And they were studying biology, they were studying astrology, they were studying economics. They knew everything, basically.
Pretty much.
And so that really helped me to understand that, oh, I see that they're speaking about the same thing of merging these two worlds over here. And, oh yeah, my studies from ancient Kemet and understanding Kemet also reinforces what it is that I constantly kept on having brought in front of me. And I totally believe that when you have those reoccurring events, that those are from a spiritual orientation. You know, this is not by mistake that you keep on getting these things presented in front of you. And what I ran into was, I did something real good as a coach, but being able to actually do these things from a spiritual standpoint and not working for anybody was really closer to my genius than it was coaching and working for somebody. So I can't work for anybody in that capacity anymore. And you start seeing all of the trials and tribulations, and you know, the times where you would have to really start questioning your integrity into certain situations. I saw that firsthand. And I knew at that point, when it just came to an apex, that it was time for me to step out. And I think a lot of your viewers, especially those who are starting their own businesses, the pandemic gave everyone this really hard reset.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I realize, and the reason why I keep on bringing up even the horror stories of managing properties is because you almost have to be able to recognize it and understand it as a part of your maturation, but you have to be able to use your spiritual system in order to understand how to navigate through those situations also.
Facts.
And it's really important because your ancestors and all your allied spirits, they're never not there. We just don't recognize them all the time. And every time, you know, a person goes through things, they don't realize that they are supposed to remember and do Sankofa type of behavior in order to be able to pull from the past what's needed in order to work with what you have today. And it's so important. And that's where I think that spirituality has that merger point, that, you know, there's really nothing new under the sun. You know, it just comes in different forms. And inside of our DNA, you know, and epigenetics also reinforces this now, is that the experiences that our ancestors had, there's a certain informational imprint inside of our DNA that some way or other we can tap into.
Preach, brother. Preach.
You know, and a lot of times we look at things in a different context, like for instance, some type of quote unquote tragedy. And in a lot of cases, sometimes that strain that we have in life is proportionate to how much we have to change our direction in thinking. And so what are these trials and tribulations? You know, are they really this bad thing, or is it really this space for us to be cracked open for something else to be put inside of us? Really, really first for something to leak out of us. And like I said, in my cases, was trying to understand how two things that I thought were so foreign, spirituality and finances,
Right.
were so distant in my mind.
Right.
But no, you have to get, metaphorically slapped in the face inside of corporate America to say, I don't need to be here anymore in this capacity. And a part of that trek has to deal with your ancestors, has to deal with your spirituality, has to deal with these archetypes that really tell you how to interact with phenomena that you believe is so, personal.
Right.
But it really is not,
Right.
So it begs the question, who am I? And what am I made up of?
Right.
And you start realizing that you're made up of an enormous amount of intelligence that our African spiritual systems allow for us to tap into to deal with everyday issues.
That's powerful. That's very powerful. And so thank you guys for tuning in. I'm your host, Andre Polite, and this is my guest, Brother Kareem Young, also known as Oya Bele. I appreciate you, brother. So be it. It is done. Ashe. We out. Peace.